What's going on, everyone? Taylor Kyles here for CLNS Media, coming at you with another episode of Pat's Daily, brought to you by our good friends at Prize Picks, the exclusive daily fantasy partner of CLNS Media. This is a very special day for me. I get to have my good buddy on. He had me on last week, and you know what? I had so much fun on the show. I was like, you know what? I'm going to rip literally your entire outline, have you come in my neck of the woods. We'll have a good time doing it from a Patriots perspective. So obviously, the draft is coming up next week. Feel like we keep rehashing a lot of the same stuff over and over again. So you guys know I've been trying to keep it fresh for you. So I figured it would be a good idea to actually get an outside perspective from someone whose opinion I admire very highly. Dude, you do amazing work. I'm going to gush about you throughout the show. So let me just keep it short for the intro, save the people. I got Anthony Prohaska of Cover One, who does an excellent job covering the Bills, but also knows his stuff when it comes to the X's and O's, the game, and the AFC East, so we can actually get some perspective. You're not just hearing from my Patriots covering mouth. But Anthony, enough is enough. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the kind words. And thank you for reinforcing the episode topic that I picked last week. So many people are like, and again, not in a negative way, but like so much content now is just like mock draft. So I try to do different things, not for the sake of doing different things, but just trying to be different, but in a quality way. And I thought that was a good idea. And I'm not saying this in a negative way, you just basically completely ripping it and taking it. I was like, oh, this is a really great idea then. Like, he likes it so much that we're just going to run it back. I'm pumped, to be part of this kind of home and home series that we got going on here. And I love ball, whether it's Bills stuff, football in general, college. This is arguably my favorite time of year. I think probably because I grew up during the Bills drought. So every year, the offseason of the draft was like, this is the year. We turn it around this year with one of these picks. So, it's awesome. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, dude, literally when we were doing the show, I wrote down on my little notepad, I was like, rip this idea. And now we're doing it. Honestly, I'm on the other end of the spectrum. Like, being into the draft has always been something, and I was like, okay, I guess. Because, like, I'm so late to the party. I don't really watch college football. This was the first year where I was like, yeah, no, it's time to dig in and actually do some learning. I feel like I'm taking baby steps.
Yeah, because you're used to every year being like, oh, man, like, we pick 32nd. Like, who are we going to get? It doesn't matter. Brady and Belichick or whatever. Yeah, it's funny how you get, like, I think depending on how, granted, if you love or don't love college football, that shapes it a bunch as well. Right. But, it's funny. I think, like, you could use us as an example of, like, growing up in a championship less playoff drought versus growing up as a Patriots fan. It's funny how we kind of see the offseason in this part a little differently.
Those perspectives have shifted. But speaking of perspective, we're going to get into all the Patriots stuff. But first, I want your opinion on the outlook for the AFC East. Now, these teams have gone through a lot of changes. Last year, it looked like the AFC East was the powerhouse of the NFL, even with the Patriots going into the season and not having very high expectations. But there have been some pretty significant moves made across the division where I feel like the power balance has not only shifted, but I feel like it's not quite as strong as it was when we were entering last season. Obviously, the draft could change some of those things, but only marginally. There's only so much impact these first-year guys can have. So give me your perspective. Rank them if you want to on how these teams stack up currently as we enter the draft.
Even though I'm not a big Ric Flair fan, I do subscribe to Ric Flair's notion of to be the man, you got to beat the man. So I'm still going to put the Bills at the top, although this is probably, again, we'll see what happens in the draft, but I think a lot of kind of knocking the Bills off the pedestal the past couple of years was more fandom than it was logistical sense. I think this year is probably the best shot for anybody to do so. You have all the roster turnover that's been happening. You have a change in leadership. You have a change potentially in culture. Could be more positive, could be more negative. You have lost Stephon Diggs, and I know a lot of Bills fans are like, good, kick him out the door, good riddance. But like we talked about last week on my show, you didn't have a ton of like tier 1 players. You lost one of them in Stephon Diggs. How do you mitigate that? So there's a lot of changes on and off the field for this Bills team. So I do think this is the best chance another team in the AFC East has to kind of knock them from their perch as opposed to previous years. But I'm still going to put the Bills 1. I know it's not a great idea for number 2 based on how everybody hates this city. I'm going to put the Jets as number 2.
Yeah.
Granted, a lot of this is going to be dependent upon Aaron Rodgers' health and what type of player he is coming back. I really like their defense. I was a believer in the Jets 2 seasons back when they still almost made the playoffs with, Mike White as their quarterback for a majority of the year. I still think their defense is real. I thought it was a blow that they lost Bryce Huff, but they replaced him with Hassan Reddick. You've got strong caliber on all three levels of play for that Jets squad with what they've done. And then you look at the jump that Quincy Williams made last year, and CJ Mosley has been able to stay healthy. You've got a squad up front. You've got a squad on the back end. You've got dudes who can play at that second level linebacker spot. And then the changes they made on the offensive line. I know everyone's still going to kind of, laugh out loud Jets, but being able to bring in Tyron Smith and John Simpson. I like the Joe Tippmann pick from last year. If Elijah Vera-Tucker can finally stay healthy, he was one of my favorite dudes in that class coming out. And then they bring in Morgan Moses. So their offensive line has been hit with the plague, or kind of like the defense against the dark arts teacher curse that exists in Harry Potter. But if they can stay healthy, and again, that's a big if for them and a lot of teams, I just think the Jets have a lot of talent and quality on that side. And so much is dependent upon Aaron Rodgers. And then after that, you do have, I think, the Miami Dolphins, who you could put them second, and I wouldn't really push back too far or rake you over the coals for it. I'm just not the biggest believer in Tua overall. Not that I ever was really against him. I always thought he was better than he got credit for, but I'm just not the biggest believer in him. Their offensive line needs some work. Ron Armstead continues to get hurt year after year, and I don't think that's a bad luck thing as much as it is. This is kind of who he is, even going back to his time in New Orleans. And then you got to see what they have on defense. We talked about him on the show last week. Zach Sealer is awesome, but you lose Christian Wilkins, who is a really important piece. Let's see what Jalen Phillips looks like coming back. I like the addition of Jordan Brooks from Seattle. I think that's a really good move and an underrated move for them, but you're losing out on Howard. You replace him with Kendall Fuller. You've got some changes on that back end. They added Jordan Poyer from Buffalo, but he's kind of a little bit on his last legs. So if you twisted my arm, you could put Miami 2, but I'll put Miami 3. And then, unfortunately for a lot of listeners in the show and even yourself, potentially, I'll put the Pats 4th. But I do think the Pats have the biggest pendulum swing opportunity based on their needs, based on the draft picks that they have, and based on the value that there can be found at the positions of needs for them in this draft. The Pats can go from they're 4th to all of a sudden being kind of a little bit of a nuisance and or noisemaker in the AFC East based on how this board falls for them, which, not even trying to look at the glass too half full or too optimistically, could really fall in their favor in this draft.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm looking at how I would personally stack it, I feel like if you're going priority of what positions or what groups are most important, obviously quarterback. That's why Josh Allen is still the king of the mountain. He needs to show us he cannot do well at this stage in his career without Stephon Diggs. You can assume it if you want, but that's still risky. He's still very talented quarterback on a different level in this division. Then you look at, Aaron Rodgers, we don't know. Not only does he need to stay healthy, that offensive line needs to stay healthy. In the offense, I said it last week, it's kind of like a retirement home for guys who were really good a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
There's plenty of talented players. No one's saying Tyron Smith, Aaron Rodgers, or Mike Williams are bad players. Nobody's saying that. But are they going to play 10 games in a season? I really don't know.
Mike Williams never can. And it's so funny that, of course, the Jets got Mike Williams. This offense that continuously gets hurt, and they bring in one of the most injury-plagued receivers of the last, 3 years.
We'll see what they do in the draft. If they decide, honestly, they need to add the offensive line, sneakily, they also have a ton of needs. But short term, it's a group that you can get excited about if you're a Jets fan, but still a lot of holes. That's why defensively, I think the Bills, if we're looking at the defenses in the AFC, are probably, honestly, 3rd or 4th just because of the losses that they've sustained. We talked about it on your show. There's not great depth, but then Josh Allen helps you there. Yep. The Jets are kind of the opposite, where the quarterback's good. We don't know what we're going to get out of him. That defense is fantastic. They have been. It's the reason there was damn near mutiny last year, because defense, it kind of showed you how bad things were with the Jets compared to the Patriots. 2 dumpster fires. One defense was not opening their mouths. The worst thing they said was, hey, maybe we got to pitch shutouts. And that was the worst you got. Yeah. Defense in New York was just basically what the F is going on? They need to pick it up. So those guys are fantastic. And then the Dolphins, I'm with you. I've never been a Tua hater, but it's also impossible to deny that he has very real flaws. You see in tight games where you think about his greatest strength is the anticipation. I know Stephen Ariz has pointed out, anticipation's great until it's not. And Tua is the headliner for that, because you saw, I forget what game it was late last season, where there was a really close game against a good team. And he ends up throwing an interception because he throws before Tua's out of his break, and he's throwing right into coverage. So that kind of thing where it's the things that you like about his game are also the things that can get him into really serious trouble. And I think a big reason why, when you see them against these really competitive playoff teams, they usually can't get over that hump. So we'll see a lot of red flags, especially defensively. Obviously, Xavier Howard's a good player, getting up there in age, not the player he was. Significant loss along with Christian Wilkins on that defensive line. If Jalen Phillips were healthy, and I know people aren't going to I'm hoping that a player in another team especially in the division, is healthy.
Yeah.
But
How dare you?
But he seems like a phenomenal human being, first of all. Hard to root against guys like that. And he's a freaking stud. Like, I just selfishly want to watch him thrive and live up to his potential. So, they've got pieces, but still there's a lot of holes. And then with the Patriots, I will say, I was beating this drum last year in Mac job. Patriots have an opportunity to win it last, and they don't. So my thing is this year, if they have an average to slightly below average offense, and they're not towards the bottom of the league in turnovers, I think this will be a much better team. Not going to be 10 wins or anything, but I think this could be like a 5-6 win team where they are appreciably better than they were last year. So I think your rankings are absolutely fair. I don't think I disagree. But since we're on the topic of the Patriots, and this is a Patriots show, I figure we might as well talk about them a little bit. Let's get into your top 3 things the Patriots need to accomplish in the 2024 draft. Now, it's interesting because they have some high priority needs, but also if you really squint at the roster, they got holes that may not be prominent now, but are coming up soon. So how do you think they should address the issues that they currently have?
I struggled between how to rank my third and second, and I'm still even right now flip-flopping. And that's why also draft season is so tough for me, because I always be like, is this person really my 16th ranked player and this other person is my 17th? And it's it doesn't matter at this point. Just put him down. No one's going to rake you over the coals. I'm going to start with offensive tackle as my number 3 spot to address. I just don't think, no disrespect, these guys are still, pros, but I think looking at that left tackle spot, and even, right tackle, I know, you talked a bunch last year about Onwenu and what he can be, but I think if you're looking at that tackle spot, especially specifically left tackle, but just tackle in general for them, trying to address that spot, especially if you're going to bring in a potential franchise quarterback in this draft, which it looks like you potentially might, and then how deep this class is as well within the draft, for that spot. I think the first place you're looking to is offensive tackle, and really even, I guess, the line in general, depending on how you feel. I don't know, maybe you don't, I'm not saying you specifically, but if you're a fan or, looking at this roster, maybe you don't love City Stone. Maybe you don't believe in Antonio Mafi being able to be anything other than just a physical road grader at times. Maybe you're still not believing in Cole Strange, although I didn't hate that pick at the time. I know that was more of a, Patricia Love piece like you talked about, but offensive line in general could kind of get some depth from a overall perspective, but especially tackle. That's my first spot. And I don't want to get ahead of myself based on what I'm going to say later, which I was almost going to drop something. So I'm going to stop talking there. But yeah, so my third one there will be, right. Yeah. So I'll say tackle for that.
Yeah. All right. So number 2, I have a feeling I know what it's going to be because, again, their high priority needs are pretty prominent. But what's it going to be? Maybe you'll throw a curveball. I don't know.
No, it's going to be wide receiver. Okay. I think you just look at that spot. I also wanted, someone in the chat said I would take the Patriots' current wide receivers over the Bills' wide receivers. That's fool. Come on. We cannot do that. I don't want to call anybody out, but it looks like Jason.
Oh, no, I will. It's okay.
Jason. That's too severe. And I get the Bills. I mean, we talked about on my show last week, what the Bills need to do at receiver. But I think Curtis Samuel is a better receiver than anybody that is on the Pat squad right now. And I like the addition of KJ Osborne. I watched a bunch of his tape to see when I was trying to find good, affordable fits for the Bills at wide receiver earlier in the offseason. I watched a bunch of KJ Osborne tape. I didn't love it as much as I thought I would. He's actually a local guy. Went to UB, University of Buffalo, and then went from there to Miami. I love the Hurricanes. I watched him play a bunch there. So I've been happy to see his journey. I didn't love the tape as much as I thought I would, which was disappointing for me.
Right? I thought he was going to be this great run blocker, and I looked at it, and that's what everybody says. Oh, he'll do the dirty work. I was sure, but there's a difference between doing the dirty work and being effective. And I was I do not see much run blocking where I'm aha, I see it.
I just thought
intermediate inbreakers. I feel like that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I expected more of a power slot effective role from him type of deal. And then even I just remember watching broadcast is a lie, but I just remember him always getting open in games and making these plays. And I'd be like, oh, I'm excited to see the tape. And it was more just no, the corner fell down because it was raining a little bit and the corner slipped and Osborne just ran by him. Or everybody jumped Justin Jefferson and Osborne just running there with his hand downfield. I'm like, oh, that's a little disappointing. So he's not bad, but I didn't love him as much as I wanted to. And you're looking at Osborne, you're looking at Kendrick Bourne, who I actually do like Kendrick Bourne in terms of what he can
him and Curtis Samuel and they do different things, but in terms of the caliber of player, I feel like they're kind of neck and neck.
I'm putting Samuel above him, and it may just be because I remember when the Bills were shellacking the Pats in Mac Jones' rookie year in the playoffs, and Osborne scores that touchdown to make it like 34-7 or something ridiculous, and he gets in the camera and flexes and does. I'm like, you're down like 30 in like the late third, fourth. What are you doing?
So there's bias here. Okay.
Yes, so maybe a little bit. But I think Osborne's sweet if he's like your legitimate like high-end 3 or a 2 in an offense where there's other
Osborne or Bourne? Osborne. I just realized that is very confusing.
Kendrick
Bourne.
Bourne.
It's okay.
Kendrick Bourne.
Just making sure.
That's also stupid. You got an Osborne and a Bourne. Like, that's annoying. That right there.
I didn't realize that until just now. I was like, oh, yeah, that's a little.
I didn't even recognize it either.
From blown coverages, who knows?
And they're spelled differently. Like, that Bourne and Osborne is spelled different than how Bourne is for Kendrick Bourne, which is also spelled differently than Jason Bourne, I think. So now we're just in the whole weeds of things, which is ironic. He's played by Matt Damon, who's from the New England area. Regardless, I don't love overall their wide receiver grouping. I do have somewhat of an affinity for Demario Douglas and what he potentially could be. I like dudes who fly, similar to, Tyquan Thornton. Maybe we'll see what he can be. I'm out on Jalen Reagor. Juju, we'll see how the health looks, what he can be. I'm still annoyed that they chose to pay Juju what they paid him and just didn't pay that amount to Jacoby Myers, who I thought the world of. Like, I still love Jacoby Myers. I'm sorry to bring up old wounds. I wish they would have just paid Jacoby Myers that 3-year, $33 million. I know getting Juju a bit of a different player. We'll see what he can be, but I actually forgot that Juju was even on that squad until prepping for this episode.
I'm not going to lie. I do too. I sometimes do.
Weird.
And I'm like going through the depth chart because in my head, it's like, he's not going to be here. So genuinely, when it comes to actually saying the receiver, sometimes I'm like, oh, damn, Juju's still here.
It's so weird. Yeah. But again, if you can recapture some of that, but I'm looking at the receiver spot. And again, a lot of it too is you mentioned like there are some sneaky needs on this team, but I really believe in a lot of dudes on the defense, even though there are some spots where they could use some reinforcement defensively. But I've been a fan a lot for the past several years of a lot of these dudes on like the Pats, and just especially with like the safeties they've rolled out over the years and how multiple they can be on the back end in terms of coverages and subsets and packages, and how you can really throw a lot of teams schematically and from an X's and O's standpoint. And then who they have. Like, I think the world of Christian Barmore, and if he stays healthy, he's a stud. Like, Judon is nasty. We'll see, if Keon White can potentially become unlocked. But, you got a bunch of really good role players up front with Anthony Jennings. We talked about him last week, being arguably the best run defender at edge in the entire game of football. So I think there are some other sneaky needs, but receiver just kind of screams at me a little bit. I think they have a bunch of good role players or supporting players, but they need more top-end talent at the receiver position. And then you start to really unlock potentially what Kendrick Bourne could be, or Juju, or even KJ Osborne.
And the one kind of sobering thing, like you mentioned Jacoby Myers, miss the guy. I'm guilty of, when the move happened, being kind of the mindset of like the grass is greener on the other side, where it's like, we know what we're going to get from Jacoby. But then like Juju's new. He's shiny. He's got that yards after catch ability. Now, to be fair, at the time, I didn't know that his knee issues was as bad as they were, where from the first day of camp, one, he wasn't there. And then when he showed up, I was like, oh, this is not what I was expecting to see. And his role was small.
And I wonder, like, does that continue? I feel like he's been hurt for like 3-4 years in a row. Like, is he able to shake that? Is he finally good? Like, it's so wonky.
Yeah, I think it was what happened in the AFC Championship game before the Super Bowl is when I think it really got bad, and that was what kind of lingered. But even still, if we're talking about like, yes, they do re-sign Jacoby. One, like, I'm not going to complain about that, because then you'd have a young guy who's still a building block with Demario Douglas, where it's like, okay, it's better than I think Kendrick, who I think is better, is like more. I do like Kendrick a lot, but even still, the Patriots would need that X receiver. I'm curious what you think about this. How about basically T. Higgins? I personally don't think the Patriots are in a position to give up draft capital and pay someone who, yes, is very talented and is relatively young, but does have a bit of an injury history. I don't even know if T. Higgins is going to be off the Bengals. He said that he anticipates being on the team. So what would you think about him potentially being a target for the Pats?
Oh, I think it's tremendous. Like, he is, again, I keep saying this, I'm probably going to say it a whole bunch. Like, we talked about this on the show last week. It's hard to find like true X's in football. Like, teams usually don't. You either have to draft them with considerable capital or value, usually in like the first half of the first round for the most part, or if they emerge later and then become a free agent, you got to throw a bunch of money at them. And teams usually don't let those kind of guys get away. T. Higgins could potentially get away because he plays on a team that has to pay Joe Burrow and has to pay Jamar Chase and all these other dudes potentially. I think that's a tremendous fit. I think Higgins is Oh, I don't know where we'd rank him, but one of the best ball winners in all of football. I mean, he coined that whole like turns 50-50 balls into 80-20 balls, and he does that consistently with his ability to separate at the catch point, dunk on dudes, high point the football, separate, and just really win consistently and play above the rim, whether it's downfield or in the intermediate. Better route runner, I think, too, than he gets credit for, but he immediately ups your wide receiver core and gives a defense someone that you have to game plan for. And I think that's the difference between T. Higgins and the rest of the Pats receivers right now, where even whoever you like the most, even if it is Kendrick Bourne, you're not game planning for Kendrick Bourne. You have to game plan for a T. Higgins, combined with the fact that he is being able to occupy that prototypical like X role in that X spot. Yeah, I think that would be a phenomenal move for the Pats, especially, again, if you are bringing in a young quarterback. You can pair him with an established dude who knows what's up, is reliable, is consistent, knows who he is. And I think that type of dude can help a quarterback find who he is.
But even for maybe like a second round pick.
Oh, well, see,
the fit I like, but it's the compensation.
I would, because I'm a big believer in and as much as I love the draft, every player in the draft, I don't care who it is it's still a crapshoot. It's still a dart throw. There is no guarantee. For all we know, like Marvin Harrison Jr. looks like such a sure thing. Maybe he flames out, and maybe the lack of, yards after catchability, or maybe there's something that just doesn't really click and he flames out like we've seen other guys who were sure things before flame out. I don't think he's going to, but I would, and this goes into some of like my draft philosophy in general, I would much rather take the thing that we know is a sure thing right now, especially too if you're pairing it with a younger quarterback. I might feel differently if, hey, we're the Chargers, or hey, we're the Bills or somebody, and you have that quarterback and you kind of know what can happen with that guy. But ideally, you're probably bringing in a young quarterback. I like the idea of pairing him with a guy who, again, knows who he is, knows what his game is. The coaching staff knows who he is, knows what he can do. And when you have that kind of known quantity, I think it sets you up better for success early on with a quarterback to kind of, again, help that quarterback find himself and adjust to the league. And even if it is, again, like a second round pick, I would still take that known quantity for a dude who, when T. Higgins is on, like, he's easily a top 20 receiver in this league. And who knows, maybe if he's the true one on a team, we see the type of production and level where he comes, I don't know, close to that top 10. And I would take that. If you told me I'm trading a second round pick for a guy who can flirt with being a top 15 or top 10 receiver, I would do that deal.
I'm in a tough spot because I see this as a year zero, where it's like, all right, get yourself like young, affordable players, like build some kind of foundation, and then kind of take the Bengals approach where you get your quarterback, you get a good receiver who may not be a one right now, and then next year you get your true wide receiver one once you get a little bit more like experience and you're ready to have this guy really take the reins. But honestly, that was a very fair point. We're going to get to your top need. I'm sure everyone is just like chomping at the bit to figure out what it is, but I'm a man of the people. So one more trade consideration. Courtland Sutton apparently is not happy with his contract situation. That came out today. I thought he wasn't on the market. I think he is the perfect fit for what the Patriots offense needs. Like that true, like we already said, true ball winner, ex-veteran guy who could probably bring something. I think he's been a captain in Denver already. So somebody who brings that leadership to the wide receiver room. What would you think about his fit?
He's a guy who I wanted the Bills to make that similar trade for. And again, because they need an X as well, kind of similar to what the Pats do. I think this would be, especially if you're worried about potential draft capital compensation, I think this is the move that makes 100% a slam dunk. I think you could get, maybe I don't even think he necessarily fetches a third. I think you're kind of looking at a fourth for Courtland Sutton. Maybe Denver can try and pry a third away for somebody. Yeah, but like you look at, I looked up his contract real quick. So he signed for 2024 and 2025. He has a cap hit of $17.4 million this year and a cap hit of $17.8 next year. Not too crazy dead cap for Denver, even if they kind of wanted to move away from it. But I guess it really depends on what he's looking for from a contract situation. He's 28 years old, a UFA in 2026. But I think that's a move that's absolutely tremendous. Say you give up a fourth round for Courtland Sutton. He fills a similar niche role that a T. Higgins would, and then you're still keeping that high capital to, again, maybe you still could play this as year zero like you talked about, or if the board falls right, you still have the opportunity to take a high-value wide receiver, potentially at pick 34, pair that with Courtland Sutton, and now you've got, a nice little core that's starting to round out a little bit, especially given he makes a lot of sense too because of who Douglas is and who Juju is and who Kendrick Bourne is and who KJ Osborne is. Like if you get that true type of established X, I think that ups the game of all those receivers that I just mentioned. And all of a sudden things start to get spread out a little bit from a passing perspective. And that's not even taking into account, Ramondre Stevenson, who I think the absolute world of and what the run game could be. So yeah, I think Sutton is, I don't want to use this word, but like, I feel like Sutton is, if you're too scared of like having to put your chips in the table for T Higgins, then Cortland Sutton is the move you make because you don't have to put nearly as many chips in any way, shape, or form.
That's a perfect way to put it. And we saw Alex Van Pelt's offense with Amari Cooper, how valuable that true X receiver can be. If T Higgins is too rich for their taste and Cortland Sutton really is on the board for something like a late day 2, early day 3 pick, I'm on board. Absolutely.
He's also, real quick, he's underrated. Like, and I don't know if it's because he never produces in fantasy the way people want him to, or just being attached to the Broncos offense. But I watched a bunch of his tape again in kind of doing the free agency work for this. Yeah, man, like he's a legitimate ball winner. Like he plays above the rim, big frame dude. Again, he's a better route runner than he gets credit for, but I mean, you could do a lot worse, especially, again, if you're pairing him with a younger quarterback, with a dude who just like, hey, Cortland Sutton's down there, let me just throw it up. And he plays above the rim. Another dude who, maybe he's not turning 50-50 balls into 80-20, but he can turn them into 65-35 or even 70-30. And that's a huge, huge aspect. And he also has the ability to make like spectacular catches. Like he's strong at the catch point, and that plays in the New England weather, the AFC East division. Like, yeah, I think that's a strong, but I don't know how I don't know if Denver is really, they either don't really have him on the market or they're asking too much, because I don't get how, if he really wants out, how a team hasn't jumped at it. If you only have to give up a 4th round for Cortland Sutton, there's so many teams that should be giving that up. Even if you think he could be something more, like he, at the worst, he's still a really good number 2 who fits that X mold that's hard to find nowadays.
He's someone whose tape does not match the lack of hype that he has. Anytime I've watched him, I'm just like, I don't know how I'm not seeing clips of him on Twitter, because his spectacular grabs are like really rare, where you're like, this guy is in his own category when it comes to that 50-50 ability. All right, I've had you on wide receivers for a while. Let's move on to your number 1 priority for the Patriots. I'm sure I have no idea what this is.
No, you're never going to guess it. You're never going to see it coming. I'm sure Patriots fans haven't even thought about this position. No, it is the quarterback spot. And, they move away from Mac. Although I do think and I know you like this move, I like Jacoby Brissett. And so, just a real high-end backup and a guy who, if something does happen to I'm not saying this is going like the Pat scenario, but he's that guy. If something goes down with your starter and you need a dude to string together like 4 to 6 games for you, he can do that. Like he elevates a lot of guys. He's so smart. He's great for your quarterback room. So I do like that move a lot. But yeah, you need a quarterback for the future. And lucky for the Patriots, they're in a spot where they could get that guy early in the 1st round. But it's quarterback. Mac didn't work out. Bailey Zappi isn't that guy. Jacoby Brissett is not your franchise guy of the future. I hate doing this because I hate doing the whole like, well, if you don't have a quarterback, you're dead in the water, because I don't believe that, but I don't think they have a good enough squad holistically around Jacoby Brissett to just leave him as that guy and then kind of do whatever they want going forward. You need the quarterback. You need that franchise piece. So quarterback, I hate to hit the low-hanging fruit, but yeah, that's the number 1 spot to everyone's shock, I'm sure.
It's unanimous. Like, they got to get a young guy in the room. And I will say, again, if we're going year 0 mentality, and the Patriots agree that maybe the offensive line isn't good enough, or the receiving talent can't get open quick enough to compensate, what have you, I think Jacoby Brissett, if he is the guy that you're going into the season with, because he's a veteran, because he can keep everything on time, knows the offense from his time with Van Pelt, I feel like he's a good enough starter for the situation they're in. Then behind him, if you want Bailey Zappi to be your backup, where he maybe gets a spot starter, like, I thought he did do better than I anticipated. I didn't think he was playable, to be honest, because it was just a disaster in camp. But then he comes in, wins them a couple games, actually has a role in those victories. And that's when Patriots players on offense were dropping like flies. Like Ramondre gets hurt this week. Hunter Henry gets hurt this week. Kendrick Bourne was long gone. So if you really want to sit Drake May, Jaden, JJ McCarthy, whoever it is, just so they can maybe get their mechanics down, or you're not really comfortable putting them in that starting situation, I think they've got a good enough quarterback room right now to fend that person off and just be like, hey, this is your Jordan Love year. You're just going to chill, and we're going to make sure that we have you really supported with the trenches and your weaponry whenever you do get your opportunity. But absolutely, I don't think there's any question that they got to get that quarterback situation figured out long term. We're going to get into some draft picks for the Patriots, how they can address these many, many needs. But first, quick word from our friends at Prize Picks. Be right back.
Get in on the playoff action and win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks, as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during basketball's postseason. You can win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with basketball and hockey entries today on Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Prize Picks is the best way to get action on sports in more than 30 states across the country, including California, Texas, and Georgia. I personally love Prize Picks because they're super easy to use, easy to navigate, and they offer injury insurance, so your entries stay live even if one of your players gets injured. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types are what make Prize Picks the #1 fantasy sports app. Download the app today and use the code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
All right, now let's get into the draft board for the Patriots, in your opinion. Let's start with the offensive tackle situation. All right, we already talked about it. This is a position where, honestly, offensive tackle and receiver, I feel like, are positions where they'd probably be better off double dipping. Like, they don't have much of a long-term future at either of those positions. Kendrick Bourne's probably going to be around for a while. Demario Douglas, obviously, is one of the few building blocks at receiver. But Chuso Okorafor is on a one-year deal. You don't really have a lot of promising talent behind him in terms of guys you think could potentially start. So, again, starting with that offensive tackle spot, who do you think are some guys that fit for them throughout the draft?
It really, this conversation, I think, really comes down to where are you taking an offensive tackle? Like, because if for some reason, you know, you really only wanted, and I'm just making this up, say they really only wanted Jaden Daniels or they really only wanted Drake May, and then one of those guys goes number 2 and they don't like whoever's left, then you're sitting there at 3, and do you go receiver? Do you go tackle? Do you trade back? Are you going tackle, you know, with your first pick in the second round at what, pick 34? Yeah, whatever it is. You're going in round 3 at pick 68, like something like that. I think the good news for the Pats is you have so many options. Like, if you go tackle at 3, you can go with anybody. I think that is a little rich given who else would probably be on the board. But I think you could realistically look at tackle at pick 34. And if we're sitting there, I'm thinking, based on how the board, I do think between like 8 to 10 offensive linemen go in the first round, especially in like the first like 27 picks. I think you could start to see a little bit of a receiver run once the Bills hit, 28 through 32, maybe start to see some receiver burn. So I'm thinking, and I'm looking at my board, maybe you have a chance at Tyler Guyton. Maybe you're looking at Kingsley Suamataia. I know Patrick Paul from Houston is a dude some people like. I think if you're really taking a guy at 34, you're probably looking at Guyton or Suamataia from BYU, unless I think I don't think Amarius Mims from Georgia is going to fall. And I know, I just don't. And maybe somebody isn't a fan of the lack of experience and isn't buying into all the hype and how high the ceiling is versus potentially what the floor is. But even the floor looked really impressive for him. And you hear a lot of people who are in the know talking about teams and scouts and GMs who are just so impressed with his level of play. I find it hard to believe he's going to get out of that first round. So I really think if you're looking at tackle, you're looking at Tyler Guyton or Kingsley Suamataia. And I think either of those guys like fit. You're looking at the athleticism. Guyton would be so intriguing because of what his upside still presents. Not the Suamataia doesn't, but just who Guyton is. He impressed me at the Senior Bowl. He's good on tape. I think you're looking at one of those two if you want to go tackle at 34. And I think if you do that, either one of the guys are so tremendous. Like, you're not upset either way if you get one of those two at 34.
Do you think Guyton can play on the left side?
I think with his upside, it's tough because I'm always like, can that guy kind of live there? I think he's worth, at the very least, with his athleticism and then who he is kind of coming out now in projection. I think you could kind of give him that shot and see what happens. I do think he has the athleticism and the feet to put himself into position to be there. And I really wish, well, I don't wish this, but if I was a Pats fan, I'd really just be like, yeah, we got Scar and he'll just coach him up and everything will be fine and just put him over there. But no, he's not there anymore. Womp womp.
Scott Peters is good. That Brian Callahan tree. We'll see what happens, but obviously nobody's.
Callahan is such an awesome O-line coach. I think about him all the time because Bills fans are always upset that they traded away Teller and they were like, oh, Teller he would have been an all-pro with the Bills. He went to Cleveland and got to learn from Callahan, who is, if not for Scarnecchia, Callahan is probably like the offensive line name to know for his generation. Like he just had the unfortunate luck of being in a situation where, again, Dante Scarnecchia was in the league for so long. I do think with Guyton, he's going to have a steep learning curve to a degree, but the athleticism, the fundamental tools, like maybe his rookie year is a little worrisome or a little rough, but I think long-term, he'd be a guy that could really work out.
Again, mentioned they might double dip. Is there anybody on day 3 who stands out you think would be a valuable guy who maybe doesn't start right away, but could, as a developmental prospect, maybe turn into something talented, whether it's after the first year or the second year, just somebody they can have in their back pocket. See, this is somebody who's really talented. Let's see what we can do with them.
From a tackle perspective, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm gonna name Christian Jones from Texas. He's a guy who I also ironically have earmarked for the Bills. I like seeing him at the Senior Bowl. He's a name that continuously looks like he's going to be available in probably that 4th round type of range. He is a bit stiff at times in his movement, which is some worrisome, but I think how he's able to maintain his strength on contact and his ability to work to the second level, and you see what he's able to do. Strong pop, strong punch in his hands. He's got that kind of shock, and he uses it to bully and be physical with dudes. And then you see the size, 6'5", 305 pounds. I like the way he moves. Also has long arms, over 34-inch arms, if I remember correctly, which is absolutely tremendous. Again, I liked what he did in person at the Senior Bowl, and some of his tape is nice. And again, you're sitting there taking a dude who has a little bit of a mean streak to him, has good hands in terms of placement and strength, and then pair that with, kind of his overall size and frame and being available. You could do a lot worse than that type of guy on day 4. And again, you're not looking for him to come in and start right away this year, but functional or quality depth for you in 2024, and then go and maybe be that starter in 2025 or 2026, depending on what happens with the rest of the line.
We're talking about a double dip. If you get your guy at left tackle who you're comfortable with, maybe put Christian Jones at right tackle, gives you the opportunity to move you around. If you end up thinking after this season, when he has a whole offseason to try it out at right tackle and get used to it, maybe he moves into his more natural position at right guard. All right. Now, wide receiver, same question. Who are you thinking? If it's a double dip, somebody you like early on in the draft, probably more realistically like the 2nd or 3rd round, and then some guys that you like on day 3 as well.
Well, I'll sit and say this. So, like, if the Pats don't get their quarterback of choice is not available at 3, I'll say that. I think you take Marvin Harrison Jr. if you're the Patriots.
Really?
Sit there, take him. I mean, I'm also a fan of, like, again, more swings at the plate. If they do want to trade out of that situation, like, that's fine. I really like Joe Alt. I like him a lot. I would just have a problem taking Joe Alt at 3, knowing that, like, if you tell me the Patriots have to sit at 3 and their quarterback of choice is gone and they don't want to take a quarterback, they have to take somebody. I'm taking Marvin Harrison over Alt, even though, like, Alt is also awesome. I'm going to turn myself into a tongue twister here. I can already sense it. Alt is awesome. But yeah, I would take Marvin Harrison Jr. there at 3. But part of the reason, like, if you don't want to, I mean, man, you're sitting there, and then pick 34 comes around. There's probably going to be a ton of receivers there on the board. Like, and you could double dip in 2 and 3. You could double dip at 2 and 4. I really think it depends on where you take that receiver. So if you take a receiver at 3, I think you're taking Marvin Harrison Jr. If you are taking a receiver at pick 34 for the Patriots, then this is where, like, from a conversation standpoint, man, you could go in so many directions. Are you looking for more of the X? And so are you hoping A.D. Mitchell falls? Do you believe Keon Coleman can be that guy? And so you're looking at Keon Coleman? Are you just drafting for overall talent? And so are you looking more at Ladd McConkey or like Ricky Pearsall, or you just want blazing speed and you're thinking Xavier Worthy? Or do you wait more towards pick 68 and go, like, what's really fun, again, it's a similar conversation for the Bills, but say you double dip at receiver at 34 and 68, in a perfect world, if I'm a Pats fan, I'm taking just whatever is the best receiver on the board at 34, whoever it is. If it's I don't care about the size or the frame. If it's McConkey, if it's Pearsall, if it's Roman Wilson, if it's Xavier Worthy, whoever the hell you want. And then I'm hoping to take at round 3 or round 4, Javon Baker, like, and pair that true X with whatever sick receiver you got at 34 and do that kind of double dip. It's a really fun conversation to have because you can go in so many directions. Like, maybe you really believe in the upside of Xavier Legette. I know you do. So maybe you take Xavier Legette at 34 if he's still there, and take a guy like, again, the conversation we had last week. Don't put a lot on his plate rookie year, bro. Just go be 6'1", 220 plus and run a 4.3. We're going to get you the ball on drags where you can really unlock your speed. We're going to throw the ball up to you downfield where you float and just dunk on dudes. Maybe that's the guy. There's so many receivers on the board from like round 2 through round 4 is going to be so deep at wide receiver. And it really just comes down to what happens at pick 3 that I think you go from there. Like, honestly too, like, and if the value based on the tackles falling, like we talked about, say they get Drake May at 3 and then they get Suamaya Taya at 34, like, that's an awesome pick. Or like, they do really believe that Guyton, who is, more favorable to the right side, they do believe that he can be that left tackle. And then you take a receiver at 68. That's still not bad because you got a sick quarterback. You got a really great tackle. And then you're going to wait to take a receiver who's still probably going to have that. You could end up with Javon Baker at pick 68. Man, say you get May, Suamaya Taya, Javon Baker. Or
that's
like
my dream scenario.
Right. Like, you just nailed QB. You did a great job at tackle. You get that X at wide receiver. It really comes down to like where the receiver that they're going to take is really, again, I'm not saying anything like revelatory here. It comes down to whatever slot they feel like, or we feel like they're going to take receiver at. If you're taking one at 3, it's Marvin Harrison, hands down. Although if somebody wants to say it should be Neighbors, okay, I disagree, but whatever. And then if you're taking one at 34, the menu is wide open. 68, the menu is wide open. Although if you're looking for that X, the menu gets a little more narrow.
Right. Any sleepers you really like, especially at that X spot? Because I feel like there are a couple. I don't know if they're going to be like full-time guys or rotational guys. I don't, because like Bub Means, like Jalen Hooker, like I feel like they have that kind of skill set where if you end up getting like an Xavier Legette, like we talked about, where he may be able to moonlight as an X, probably isn't best there. Probably best is like a Z slot or somebody you move around. Are there any sleepers you like who could maybe fill that X role, or maybe just some playmakers? The Patriots' bottom line, like we could talk about position and all that, but at the end of the day, they need playmakers as well. So, what was yours?
And a lot of it, what I'm about to say, is going to come down to who he is kind of off the field. I really like Jermaine Burton, and I believe in his tape. Dude is just,
I don't know if he's on the board for them.
No, like, and that's what I'm saying. The interview is going to come down. Like, if you get this guy in the room and he is who he may potentially seem to be based on some of the off the field stuff, or even on we talked about it last week. He has that great rep, that skip step against Tennessee or whatever, scores that touchdown, and then just two foot kicks the corner and chucks him off him.
Insane.
For no reason. And again, too, like we talked about, like, you won the rep and scored the touchdown. Like, you shouldn't be salty. It's not like the corner knocked the ball out and talked smack to you. Like, you won that rep. Like, why are you literally kicking that guy when he's down? But I think he's so electric from a playmaking standpoint. And I also think with his skill set, he could develop into a true X with the release package he has. And also, again, you and I talked about this last week. So much of getting off press is a mentality thing. And Jermaine Burton on the field is literally like, I don't care who you are. Like, if you want the smoke, come get it. Like, I am ready to punch you in the mouth if you want to press me. I know I'm probably faster than you, and I can see what can happen. He's a dark horse for me where, again, if the behavior stuff checks out, if we're talking just from a tape perspective, he's got some of the most fun tape in this class from a wide receiver standpoint. Jamari Thrash is also a sleeper that I don't think gets talked about enough.
Yeah. Okay.
Real quality route runner. He had a good Senior Bowl. I liked seeing him in person. And he's got some wins on tape. He's not a burner, not the biggest field stretching guy, although he isn't small. Slow. Where's my notes? Ran a 4.46. So again, he's not slow, but I don't think he necessarily plays to a 4.46. I don't think he's necessarily a field stretching guy, which is fine because he can win underneath. He can win in the intermediate. He has enough speed to get deep and be effective in the third level. He's also got and this is going to sound like maybe such a small thing to praise, he's got like arguably the best hitch route in the entire class. Like his ability to just work into a blind spot and run a corner off. He does it every single game, anywhere from 2 to 4 reps a game, where he just creates like literally 5 to 7 yards of separation because the corner is still in bail and doesn't realize that Jamari Thrash has settled down already and is wide open underneath. He also creates yards after catch because of his ability to transition from pass catcher to ball carrier because of how aware he is of things there. I think he could be, his projection is all over. Some people want him at the end of round 2. Some people think he's more of a day 3 guy. I really like what he presents regardless of where you take him. And so again, I know there's some other sexier names. I also really like Jalen McMillan, the other receiver from Washington. I think he goes more in the late day 2, early day 3 type of range, based on who he is and what he presents. But yeah, there's a lot of fun options you can have, but just from guys who I don't think get talked about enough, I'll say Jamari Thrash from a sleeper perspective. And yeah, I think Burton falls into that category as well because he's such a wild card. Like you don't know what you're really getting, and it's not great, but also maybe he just seems like such a punk in a good and bad way. And but man, the tape is so fun.
It is fun. I will say for rebuilding franchise, it scares me. Like they're talking about character and all this stuff. And I'm just like, I don't know if you're at the point in your rebuild right now where you can, but Thrash is someone watching the Senior Bowl. I was like, who is this? The stop-start ability, the change of direction, the explosiveness, those popped. Speaking of pop, I feel like, you could argue they might be redundant, but again, I think it's fine. Like he's a guy that can still make plays for you. We don't know what Demario Douglas's health situation is going to be, so I wouldn't be mad if they ended up getting Thrash, especially at a good value. So I really like those. All right, now let's get into quarterbacks. Now, let's be real. This is not one where there's like a whole lot of options if we're talking like serious consideration. Really, it's down to like May, Daniels, JJ McCarthy, maybe Penix if they trade back, but I feel like that's really more than doing their due diligence. I know he's visiting for a 30 visit today. Talk me through how you feel about May, Daniels, and McCarthy, what you like about their games, what you don't, and who you think would be the best fit for the Patriots as, again, they enter this year 0 rebuild.
So I'll start with Drake May, who I also think is the best fit, which I know is probably music to your ears because I know how much you like Drake May. I really like how he plays the game, but this is part of the reason I like him. Like, even though he is a bit reckless at times, like in a bad way, which is an area of his game that he has to work on, that recklessness is also kind of super fun to watch because it also leads to some of the ridiculous, like, shovel passes he's making as he's being brought down by an edge, or some of the throws that he tries to make, or deciding to throw the ball left-handed, like all the crazy stuff that he does, which he kind of, I don't want to say does with regularity, but it's not crazy for him to pull out these like X Games type of throws with somewhat regularity because of the type of player that he is. I think who he is as a passer, the arm talent, the throws that he can make, he can fire darts in there, he can throw with touch and layer the football. I also like some of the pre-snap stuff that he did this year, which you see it on tape. And then Nate Tice did a great thread of kind of breaking down some of the pre-snap stuff that he's doing that isn't coming from the sideline. I think he's a smart, heady dude. He's got the prototypical size you want in terms of quarterback. Like, he looks the part, like 6'4", 220 plus. He's not the runner that Caleb Williams is, but he's still like mobile. He's still a good runner. Like, I think he's just built for today's NFL in terms of he can play on time, but he can also play within the chaos and thrive within the chaos. Now, again, sometimes he's the source of that chaos, which isn't the most necessarily like ideal thing. And I think too, just at times it feels like he misses easy throws. And I don't know if it's from a processing standpoint. I don't know if it's from sometimes his mechanics get a little wonky, but he'll miss some throws that and this was when, like, before I was just watching for him, like I'm watching, North Carolina, Clemson, where he makes a ridiculous throw, but I'm watching for Nate Wiggins, but there's like all these times where the ball just keeps hitting the ground, but these guys are like, yes, or he'll sail it, or he dirts it. He makes these throws. And I'm just like, I don't understand what you're doing. I think tying into the mechanic piece as well, I think sometimes he gets happy feet a little bit, either in the pocket or kind of gets the Josh Allen syndrome, ironically, where there really isn't pressure and the pocket isn't. Oh, that's ironic because Jason in the comments just said, sounds like early Josh Allen. Yeah, I didn't even mean to like plan that. Yeah, he'll get like some of the happy feet moment, or the times where he's like oh, I got to escape the pocket, got to go. It's like, no, you don't. Just stand there. You'll be fine. But again, I think he likes to live in that chaos, and it's understandable. He uncorks some wild throws. He makes some ridiculous plays with his legs. So May for me would be the most ideal guy. Jaden Daniels, we talked about him last week. And I don't know if I just can't shake Arizona State Jaden Daniels from my mind, or if it's because of how he's so electric and so explosive. But I feel like he's going to get like gored or speared and be done just because he's what, like 200? I think he's 210 pounds.
I think that was like soaking wet.
That's what I was gonna say,
on 210 pounds. He might be like sub 200 if we're talking like regular weight. Yeah.
That's he like put a couple like 5-pound weights in his pocket or like put something like oranges in his hoodie or something to like weigh and wouldn't take the hoodie off. Like he looks skinny, and there's those reps that you see him just get annihilated against like Ole Miss, where he's getting wrecked by like just corners at the college level. Dude, imagine what's going to, and I know he's extremely athletic and extremely electric with the ball in his hands, but what happens when like, I don't know, like an NFL linebacker catches you, man, or like a safety or a corner, or I don't know, you're playing the Bengals and like that corner that's hitting you is Cam Taylor-Britt or Mike Hilton, and they hit like a freight train. Yeah, they're coming through you, man. And like, I just see him being like constantly having bruised ribs, or he gets like a puncture lung. Like, and I hate doing that. Of just knocking a guy because of his frame, but it worries me a little bit. But on the other side of it,
he's not like Lamar, where Lamar, you rarely ever see him really get hit.
Yes.
And he still like has to miss time because he's not the biggest dude in the world. Jaden is elusive, but he does take those massive hits, where I think it's kind of irresponsible to just assume that he's going to go through an entire NFL season healthy, just to your point.
No, yeah. And I wonder how much of it is arrogance, but in like a good way, of him just being like, I'm the best dude on this field. I'm just going to keep making plays. It is what it is. So part of me wonders like, okay, can some of that be coached out for them to be like, hey bro, like stop taking the hits. You need to slide. But I also say that as a Bills person, and they can't coach that out of Josh Allen. He's there taking shots on 3rd and 17 when he's run for 4 yards and he's nowhere going to get close to the first down. And he's still trying to truck dudes no matter like who I forget who tweeted it out. I think it was Ted Wynn from The Athletic, who said Jaden Daniels is like vegan Josh Allen with how he plays the game. And it was just like, I feel like Jaden Daniels thinks he's like 6'4", 6'5", 240 with how he runs. But on the flip side of that, that's also what's so intriguing about his game. If you are going to play man coverage, or if your rush lanes break down and he takes off, he's arguably like the fastest guy on the field. He throws one of the best slot fades in the entire class, if not in the entire class. He has some darts at times where he can make explosives with his arm that go in tandem with his legs. And I think that's the intriguing part about Jaden Daniels. I think for me, there is some worry in terms of what his floor can be because of his overall size and frame. I do think his processing leaves something to be desired at times, but if you're drafting Jaden Daniels or drafting him for the explosives, which is really what today's NFL is all about, like defenses are structuring themselves to put a cap on everything, keep the play in front of them, take away explosives, and make teams try to nickel and dime them down the field. So today's game is really about how do you generate those explosives? It's part of the reason why Malik Neighbors is a guy who some people like more than Marvin Harrison, because Malik Neighbors is a walking explosive play. Just hand him the football and he can get you 20 yards in the blink of an eye because of how explosive he is. It's part of the reason Tyreek Hill is so dangerous. Jaden Daniels is almost like that for the quarterback spot with his arm and with his legs. He's a walking explosive play. And that's, again, extremely intriguing. McCarthy, I've come around a bit. I just don't believe in him too much. Like sometimes his footwork is awful. Like he can't hit it deep out. He threw the ball like 5 times a game because he played at friggin' Michigan and they never passed the ball. But then he's uncorking like, and I don't want to hate on him, but like the throw that everyone shows at versus Ohio State.
That's the first one it always comes to mind.
The throw is amazing. I don't think he planned that throw like that. Because he didn't know that second level defender was not going to look for the ball. Like
he looked at him. He looked at him before he looked at the target. So I was like, what in your brain told you that was a good decision? He's staring at you.
And it works. And everybody's like, man, look at that tight window throw. And yeah, but that's more of like the result isn't indicative of how unsound the process was for that throw. But you like the leadership qualities, you like who he is as a person, what everyone talks about. But that also makes me a little wary. Like anytime that's the first thing you lead with for a quarterback, that makes me worry about like who you can actually be on the field, like, or any player in general, right? Like we get it, man, tell me how good, Timmy is, man. He's the first one in the gym. He's the last one out. And I'm immediately like, okay, so he's not good on the field. Like he's a high character guy who works out really hard. Great. I don't think that's necessarily about, or what JJ McCarthy is. I do think he's an above average athlete. He's quicker than he gets credit for. Like he's a good runner as well. Like all four of these quarterbacks at the top are mobile to some degree. And McCarthy may not be in the category or caliber of Jaden Daniels, but dude can still move. He's tough. I do think he's got good arm strength. When he rips it, he can rip it. He can make throws on the move. And I do think he can make a lot of throws like on the field, given that arm strength. But I just feel like he's a lot more projection than people are talking about because of the offense that he comes from, the volume of work that he's had, and some of the throws, again, that he does make, like his processing at times or how uncomfortable he seems hitting certain throws that are regularities in the NFL, like a deep out, for example, to his right. His footwork gets sloppy. And it's not just like, oh, his feet got messed up on that one, or, he dipped his back shoulder a little bit. It looks like he's uncomfortable making those throws. And again, maybe a full off season of drill work and prepping to throw regularly instead of handing off to Blake Corum 75 times a game will do him well. But I think somebody's going to take him in the first round. I'm not taking him at 3 if I'm the Pats. I'm hoping that it's Drake May. I would understand if it's Jaden Daniels, but I'm really hoping it's Drake May if I'm the Patriots.
Yeah, with me for Drake, like the upside, I just think he's in a different category. It's like Caleb Williams is in his own stratosphere, then it's Drake May. I will acknowledge that, especially the more I'm kind of like rewatching, just so I can be like, all right, if they don't get him, like let me get myself down to reality. Like, what does he really need to improve? The accuracy really is jarring because when you watch the other guys, they don't have the number of like really bad misses that he does have. Sometimes he goes way too quickly through his process. Then he'll miss windows and he kind of gets panicky and he'll try to throw later, something like that. I do think the like risk aversion isn't as bad as it's made out to be because like he had an almost identical turnover-worthy play rate to like Jaden Daniels. So I think he generally does do a good job of protecting the football. And when he does that weird improvisational thing, like with the flicks, it generally, to his credit, is to like wide open guys.
Yeah, it works.
His outlet's just standing there, and it's like, yeah, you don't really want to throw as you're going down, but it's like Mahomes, I don't want to make that. I'm not making this comparison, but like Mahomes does that stuff. Like, especially when he was younger, that's kind of thing where he like throws it with his left hand. And it's like, no, if you have a good sense of like space, which I do think he does, where like, especially if pressure's bearing down, you can tell he knows when guys are coming because he's got that long release. It's rarely a problem when he's got guys that are about to hit him. So I think some of that's a bit overrated, but I do think that he needs to be more consistent in his process, which is, I think, something that all these guys need to be better at, maybe outside of Caleb. So that's why I love Drake. With Jaden, you can't play man coverage against him. Like, if you got the right receivers who he can hit on those fades and the go balls, and then if you turn your back, like you said, he can just kill you on the ground. Can't do that against him. I do wonder, because he's been playing for so long, been a starter for so long, and as you mentioned, does have some of the issues where he also seems like his process can be really fast, and there's certain throws he doesn't really hit. And it's not even like a Michael Penix Jr. where it's partially because of his supporting cast. It's like, no, you can see there are times where he could have hit a throw over the middle, instead decided to run, which you wonder, okay, maybe he's getting coached where it's like, you are the best athlete on the field.
Right.
If you think you have a lane, go take it. We'll see how that translates to the league. But with the arm strength, like I saw somebody said that Jaden Daniels has a better arm than Drake May. Jaden Daniels' arm is like fine. It's one of the reasons I think when he runs to run and doesn't run to throw. Because when he's off base, he really has to put his entire body into it if he's throwing downfield. I don't think that's where he
that's a great point. I'm thinking of all the times, like, I can't even recall, and I'm sure they exist, but like, I'm thinking of all like the LSU tape I've watched, and I can't remember Jaden Daniels scrambling and then throwing on the run. Like, every scramble leads to him tucking and taking off, which again, usually works.
Right.
But yeah, I really can't even think of one like where he's throwing off platform.
The glaring one's against Ole Miss. He's rolling to his left and he's throwing downfield, and his receiver gets hit and drops it, but he puts his entire he has to really wind up and get it there. Whereas like Drake May or like even JJ. Really, it's not that much effort. And then moving on to JJ, watching him again, the thing that really bothers me is he really is a one-speed thrower, where you see it especially on deep throws, where sometimes like there was I think it was against like Rutgers, where he hits a back shoulder downfield, and it's like, oh, that was a really good throw. But he tried it 3 times, and the other 2 times hit the defender in the back, where it's like, oh, no, you can't put touch and throw it in front of the guy. You really have to put it in a certain spot.
Yeah. And that's why it's more projection than people talk about. Like it just, but someone will, and you know what's funny too? Oh, I want to like pound the table right now, not in a good way. I've seen people use the one that works from that Rutgers game as like, and it's because it's to his left.
Right.
And people be like, oh, people want to talk about like, you know, McCarthy can't throw left. Look at this dot. But yeah, he failed on the same throw like 3 other times. Like you grabbed the one that worked. Oh, I just think he's so much more people. I feel like some reason he's been starting to creep up into this like pro ready polished quarterback now that's going to elevate everybody like he did at Michigan. No. And I don't see that. And I just think he's more projection than he gets talked about. Sorry, you
no, you're good. And there's another throw in that same Rutgers game where like it's kind of reminds me of the Ohio State one where he's throwing it down the seam. And if there was no safety in the middle, like it's fine. He puts it high and goes up. And I'm charting it, and I'm like, I'm going to put that as an inaccurate pass because it's high. The safety takes a bad angle. It's like if a safety in the league wanted to light him up, that's a hospital ball every single time because you're leaving him out to dry. I don't know if he wanted to put it that high necessarily, but it's either inaccurate or it's just poor awareness because you cannot throw high passes like that when there's a safety right in the middle of the field. So as a passer, there are absolutely limitations. But then I look at, okay, one, he was legitimately a part of their rushing attack. And I think he is fast. Like, I don't think he's got blazing speed or anything, but I'm like, I think you can legitimately use him in your run game if you want to be kind of that really like ground heavy offense and keep that going.
He didn't run a 40, right?
I think he did. I think it was something fast. I can look it up real quick. JJ McCarthy, 40. I feel like it was something that was pretty impressive. Oh, he didn't run. Okay, he didn't run. Maybe I'm getting him confused with Penix, honestly.
What a jerk. I hate that. That's why I thought, like, I don't have anything in my notes for a 40, and I was like, oh, did I miss it? But to your point, yeah, you can run legitimate, like, read option or, like, modern-day triple option stuff functioning within an RPO, like, scheme, and then use him on that, to your point, absolutely.
And I know there's a game where he hit like 20.25 or something miles an hour. So
that's
like
legit.
He's legitimately fast. And I think his creative ability, like he's only going to do it going to his right. That's just kind of what it is. But Josh Allen, a lot of his success goes running to his right. Not the same player, obviously, but just an example of like, it's not the worst thing in the world. I think his play extension ability is better than he gets credit for. I've seen him throw some darts to the sideline, like deep down the field. It's clearly something he's comfortable with, but I do think there are legitimate limitations where it's like, if you think you can fix that, sure. I don't know how you fix a guy and teach him to throw with touch when he's so dependent on these javelin throws. And when, you know, you see the footwork where he just is swinging his foot when he's going to the left and you see these weird misses that he doesn't have to other parts of the field. So I do think that obviously Drake is ahead of the pack for me. Jaden, I'll talk myself into it. It won't be that hard, but I do think he's more floor than he is ceiling. And JJ is just such a wild card. But if, you know, the Patriots don't like Jaden, personally, I wouldn't mind if they traded back and then found some way to get JJ later. But, you know, I don't even think that's a realistic possibility, to be totally honest. All right, I'll get you out of this. Let you talk about the Bills real quick. So, obviously, wide receiver is probably the biggest need for this team, but as we mentioned on your show, there are several needs for this team on defense, like safety, edge position, even at guard. Probably don't want to address that in the first round, but what do you think the Bills are going to do with their first round pick?
I'm super torn on this. I think everything in the world screams wide receiver, but I cannot shake the feeling of somebody at another position falling and them going with that other person, whether it's an interior offensive lineman or Johnny Newton or a corner or Latu falls because of the medical. Even though I don't necessarily think that's going to be true now. I had Dane Brugler on yesterday for a bonus episode. He talked about like, thank you. I was really pumped. He talked about like a bunch of teams have him, like more teams have him cleared than have like flags because of the medical. He doesn't think Latu makes it past pick 25. But I don't know, maybe Jared Verse falls into the late teens and the Bills trade up for Verse because they do have some capital with that 2 they got next year for Stephon Diggs. I don't know why. Yeah, my gut keeps telling me that it's going to be Jackson Powers Johnson or Johnny Newton or Graham Barton falls and they take Graham Barton, or they take Kool-Aid McKinstry, or Terrion Arnold falls for some reason and it's Terrion Arnold. Like, I think with the receiver run, I think is going to determine so much of what happens with the Bills. Because, like I said, I think if we're talking about the first 27 picks, because the Bills have pick 28, I think 4 receivers go in that first 27. I think Quinyon Mitchell goes. I think Brock Bowers goes. I think you have probably around 8 offensive linemen that go.
Yeah.
I think when you start to look at that, I think Byron Murphy goes. I think Jared Verse goes. I think Dallas Turner goes. When you start to frame it in that, there's really only like 7 to 8 picks where you can kind of swing the pendulum a little bit. And if more of that is a receiver run, again, the big 3 receivers are going to go in those first 27. If we start to see more of a run on receiver, if Worthy goes, if Brian Thomas goes, if AD Mitchell goes, that means one of these good interior offensive linemen or Johnny Newton or a really good corner is falling 28. And the Bills have shown time and time again that they draft to kind of whatever their board is from a best player available standpoint. And it led them to Osiris Torrance last year in the second round. And if somebody good from a non-receiver spot falls at 28, I could see them going that way. My head just be like, they're going to go receiver, but I really could see them going just best player available at anything. Like, it really, because again, corner's a sneaky need. They need a backup 3-tech, but again, with how much they rotate, their backup 3-tech is an integral part of the defense. They still really need top-end edge help because AJ Epinesa is really a 3. You don't know what you're getting from Von Miller. And even so, Von Miller with his age and what he looks like going forward, you could really use a number 2. Yeah, you could use a 1 or a 2 this year, let alone for the future. There's all these sneaky areas of need for this team, and I think there could be a quality blue chip player that falls at one of those positions of need that isn't a wide receiver that muddies the whole board. I really think it comes down to how many receivers go in the first 27, and that's going to determine what they do. Because I don't think they're going to reach for, maybe it's not a reach or how their board is, but I don't think they're going to go with Ladd McConkey at 28. I don't think it's going to be Ricky Pearsall if it's one of those guys there. If they go receiver at 28, it's because someone with a true X prototype is there. Like they're not worried about anything effort wise with Mitchell or Brian Thomas fell, or they believe in Xavier Legette, or they believe in Keon Coleman, and that's going to be the guy at 28. But if that run on receiver happens, I think it's going to be best player available at either corner, defensive tackle, or interior offensive line.
Who's your dream pick though?
Oh, like who's, and I'm not trading, like someone just fell to 28.
Somebody fell.
Johnny Newton from Illinois.
That'd be a crazy guy to put next to Ed Oliver.
And he's got short arms, and he doesn't have he's not the best proportion type of dude. And people talk about how he gets owned at times against the run or even in pass pro, which happens from time to time. But a lot of that with Illinois happens when they run odd front stuff and some stacks. So he's lined up in a 4-eye or a 5 sometimes, and then he's going up against tackles who, have him beat with length, and they beat him on first touch and control him. You put him as a 3-tech in a 1-gap penetrating defense, I think he just takes off like a friggin' rocket. You watch the tape, and it's not just the Wisconsin game. I've watched 7 games of his. And also, too, he played half the year with a friggin' broken foot, including that Wisconsin game. Yeah, he had a Jones fracture in his foot. Including that Wisconsin game where he just annihilates everybody. He's playing with a broken foot in that game based on what the timeline is. You put him as a 1-gap penetrating 3-tech, and Bills fans don't like it because they're like, well, he's going to be a backup to Ed Oliver, but not on passing downs and not in known passing situations. You're going to line him up at 1-tech, or you're going to have double 3s, whatever, but it's going to be him and Ed Oliver on the field at the same time. And then they're causing havoc on the interior in terms of penetration and what you can do with the depth of the pocket. That also then helps them keep Daquan Jones fresh, who last year before he got hurt was on pace to be an all-pro. So now when the playoffs roll around, you can lean into Daquan Jones more in his skill set, which is such a really great player on first and second down, but he offers you more as a pass rusher than he really gets credit for, given what he was coming to be as a true 1-tech. And again, with how the Bills rotate their front, just like how so many teams do now, you really need a top 6 minimum when it comes to your defensive line. And I think even though he'd be the backup 3-tech to Ed Oliver based on what he offers as a pass rusher, and he's better against the run than he gets credit for. He's not to Byron Murphy's level, but he's a real quality player still. I just think he ends up seeing 45 to 50% of snaps, and you have a three-headed monster inside with Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, and Johnny Newton. And yeah, the name of the game in the AFC is still try and impact Patrick Mahomes, and there's no better way to do that than collapse the interior of the pocket, cause chaos inside, and win inside, and I think he gives you that. And again, part of that for me is I believe in a lot of the receivers that you can get on day 2, so I don't have a problem taking him and then taking Javon Baker at pick 60 or taking Jalen McMillan or even Jalen Polk, who I don't love to a degree. Like you can get so many other receivers there at pick 60. Johnny Newton is still in a perfect world. Byron Murphy from Texas somehow falls. And that's the guy. I really don't see that happening. My realistic kind of dream would be Johnny Newton or Graham Barton from Duke, but I don't think Barton falls as well. I think the most realistic out of all of it combined with being a dream is Johnny Newton.
Love you, buddy. Hope those dreams don't come true. Got to be honest.
I understand it. I hope you guys take JJ McCarthy at pick 3.
Oh, that's sick. That's sick. I'm not letting you end on that, though. One last thing. You mentioned how the Bills usually go best player available. So you asked me this on your show. I would love to get your perspective. What is your draft philosophy or philosophies?
I talked about one of them earlier. I prefer to have more swings at the board just because, or at the plate, more dart throws at the board, whatever verbiage you want to use. Just because the draft is a crapshoot. So I prefer to have as many picks as possible. In a dream world for me, especially in this draft, like I'm always trying to acquire as many day 2 picks as possible. Like I love the idea, even for the Bills. I'll tell you kind of another dream scenario and tie it into it. If the board falls the right way, I really love the idea of the Bills trading back from 28 into the mid 30s and picking up a pick in the 80s or the 90s, like getting a 3rd round at the same time and being able to do something. So just a basic philosophy again, like I always prefer to have more swings at the plate than not. I never want to draft for need. I think that handcuffs you. It forces you into kind of getting away from quality and value. And I also think that potentially telegraphs like your picks to other teams, and teams know, well, the Bills need a corner here. Let's be the Kansas City Chiefs and jump ahead of them and maybe get Trent McDuffie before they can get Trent McDuffie. And then the Bills are sitting there. Granted, they still had a first on Kyrie Elam or whatever, but if teams kind of know where you're going to go, they can get ahead of you. They can jump you. They can take guys that you want. And not to mention too, then you feel like you're potentially hamstrung or handcuffed into getting there. I also think that ties into your free agency approach, which is you should use free agency to mitigate as many of your holes and needs as possible. Like, which is like, it's awesome to get like the A or the A+ guy if you have the money, but I'm using free agency really to get as many like B+ guys as I can. And then I'm trying to use that draft to swing and hit those home runs and get my A players from the draft and have them under term and contract and all that stuff. So those are my 2 big ones. I prefer to have more swings at the plate, and I'm always going best player available, which is gotten me into so much hot water with Bills fans this entire offseason because a lot of times, like you said, like, oh, what's your dream scenario? And I'm like, oh, Johnny Newton. And everyone's yelling at me because I didn't name a wide receiver. And I recognize the need, but again, like I'm just taking the best player available and then kind of mitigating things from there.
You know what I said it on your show. I feel like best player available is also kind of something you do from a position of privilege. Like, if you're a team like the Patriots where it's like, no, you need a tackle, you need a receiver, or it's legitimately going to impact your ability to win games, you kind of got to mix the philosophies. But again, ideally, your roster's in a place where, like, yes, you have needs, but you would like to be able to still get quality players and then go from there and not miss out on guys that, a guy who might turn into an all-pro versus a guy who might just be a Pro Bowler. Buddy, been a pleasure as always. Great stuff as always. Please let the people know where they can find you and what fantastic stuff you got coming down the pipeline that we should be looking out for.
Thanks. I appreciate you. Find me on Twitter at pro__ant. So pro 2 underscores ANT. I'm pretty active on there a lot. My biggest thing is I'm always just posting film and clips. I tweet stuff out with words and that, but a lot of what I do is just film breakdowns, X's and O's, schematics. In season, it's a lot of Bills stuff, but really I just cover NFL stuff and ball in general. And then especially this time of year now, if you search, pro Ant and some prospect that you like, I probably got anywhere from like 3 to 10 clips and breakdowns related to that player. So I'm all about film and showing my work. I host a solo show on the Cover One network called Disguised Coverage. It's live every Tuesday. 9 p.m. Eastern. I have a live show coming tonight. I'm doing a mock draft. It's my only one, and it's really because only one of my buddies who used to be on the brand is doing it with me, and so we're going to kind of monkey around and do that. I did an episode yesterday that I alluded to where I had Dane Brugler from The Athletic. It was awesome. We just sat and talked prospects and evaluations, so that's up there as well. And then every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern, I host a show called The Film Room, and that show is purely me and Eric Turner, who founded Cover One. We're just breaking down film, concepts, schematics, coverages. If we're talking players and evaluation, we're showing tape. We're breaking down, what good technique looks like, what fundamentals look like. But again, everything for me is X's and O's and schematics. That's pretty much who I am. Yeah, that's it.
I learn from you all the time, but seriously. One, I mean, you did a pretty good show last week. I think people should also watch. But the Dane Brugler one.
No, my guest last week sucked. He was just awful. Tacky, rude, didn't know football, doesn't like Star Wars, was just a guy who I just could not see myself doing anything with. Doesn't like Funko Pops. It just wasn't my thing.
All right, I'm going to shake that up, but at least he's handsome.
Well, that's a stretch. That's
all right. I'm going to end the berating of Taylor Kyles for now. But once again, Ant, thank you, buddy. I appreciate you. Appreciate you all for watching as always. Now take care of yourself.